Some coffee beverages. Hello, good morning. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Hi, welcome. Enjoy the music as we wait for a few more folks.
She's a pretty bird, she sings as she flies. She brings us glad tidings and she tells us no lies. She sucks all the pretty flowers that make her voice clear, and she never says cuckoo till the spring of the year.
All right, hello. Let me just stop sharing my screen so we can actually see faces here. There we go. I'm just gonna switch over to the view. Hello, welcome, welcome, welcome. So welcome to NET's Inspiration on Demand, Creators in Conversation. We are in the thick of summer, at least where I am, but we hope that everybody is relaxing and hanging in there and just grab a cold frosty beverage and join us for this incredible dialogue today. I have my water, I have my iced tea, I think I'm set. In case I don't know you, my name is Patricia Garza. I'm the Director of Programs and Engagement here at NET. I'm just so blessed to share community with everyone. I'll do a quick visual description for folks who need that. I'm a Latinx human with short black and gray hair and purple cat-eye glasses. Today, I'm wearing a black and white polka dot dress with some pearl earrings, and I have many books behind me in my office. I prefer they and them pronouns, but I totally accept she, her verbally. And I just want to start us off today with a land acknowledgement. And I want to recognize that we are coming from all different places around this country. And so I can acknowledge that I am currently playing, living, and breathing and sleeping on Tongva Quiche land here in East Los Angeles in California. But if you want to participate in a land acknowledgement today in the chat, I'll go ahead and have Alicia will drop a link in the chat for us if you don't know what land you reside on and want to participate in a land acknowledgement today. We'll drop that resource. I also want to recognize the beautiful music and voice you heard welcoming us into the space was created by NET member Mina Malik. Thank you, Mina, and her trio, Voki Angelica Trio, and they are an international band with members hailing from 3 continents. Straddling the genres of world folk and classical music, the trio creates an ambitious blend of cultures, reinvigorating traditional songs for contemporary audiences. Love them. I love their music. I already downloaded all their albums. So a huge thanks for the trio for partnering with NET on this series and sharing their gorgeous work with us. We'll drop a link in the chat to their website if you want to hear more of their music. So thank you, Mina. So let's try to support them. I also want to acknowledge my amazing colleague who's supporting today on all things tech in the chat, Alicia Tonzik, our executive director. Thank you, Alicia. And just some quick access and logistical needs. So access needs, we are recording this. So if you, for whatever reason, miss a piece of it or want to share it with a friend or a colleague, we will have it up on our YouTube channel. So not to fear. The chat is enabled, but just again, I always say this, please be cognizant that we can all see it. So nothing is private on Zoom. And if you need closed captioning, you should see some text there on the bottom of your screen. If for some reason you're not, just go ahead and go to that bottom toolbar and you can enable live transcription. Or if you find that distracting and want to turn it off, you can also do that from the bottom toolbar. If you're having any issues, just go ahead and put, please help me in the chat. And I'm sure either Alicia and I can figure it out. If you want to change the view you're in, you can go to the upper right and go to speaker view. So that way you can see Michael and Ping in all their beauty and glory. Or if you love seeing the whole crowd, you can view us in gallery mode, whatever you prefer. So I see some new faces here. So I'll just do a quick reminder of why we're here and what are we doing. So it's Net's 25th birthday, our anniversary this year, and we want to create a space to come and really gather as a community and spark inspiration when you need it the most. So we co-created this series with our incredible board members in hopes that we can offer that gift of inspiration to those live here on the Zoom joining us today, and also for all of you who are watching this later and on demand. So we asked our board these questions. Who are your mentors? Who are the artists you admire the most and that really inform and activate your own ensemble practice? And so we asked each of our board members that, and you will see a whole series of answers and responses with these incredible artists that we have in conversation like today. We will be taking a quick summer break in August, so no inspiration on demand in August, but we will come back stronger than ever in September with more incredible conversations from artists in our field. And I encourage people to look at all the 6 months leading up to today on demand on our YouTube. We have some amazing conversations. So now, time for the conversation. I'm so excited. I'm just going to read a sliver of our guests' bios for people today who may not be familiar with their work, but I imagine you are, which is why you're here. So just very abridged. First, I want to welcome our guest, Ping Chong. Hi. Ping is a theater director, choreographer, and video installation artist, seminal figure in the Asian American arts movement, and a pioneer in the use of media in theater, including the founder and artistic director of Ping Chong and Company. I could go on, but I'll just read a little bit more. His theatrical works bring his unique artistic vision to bear on major historical issues of our times and focus on bringing unheard voices and underrepresented stories to the stage. His work encompasses puppetry, dance, documentary theater, sound, and other experimental theater forms. His work has explored a wide variety of subjects with the common thread of unifying commitment to artistic innovation and social responsibility. Thank you so much for being here. It's so exciting. And we'll drop a link in the chat to your company, Ping Chong and Company. And to our NET board member, Michael Rohd. Michael, so excited to have you here. Michael is a co-founder and ensemble member of the national ensemble-based Sojourn Theatre. He's an institute professor at Arizona State University Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts, the author of the widely translated book, Theater for Community, Conflict, and Dialogue. So exciting. He is an artist for the Civic Imagination at Center for Performance and Civic Practice, CPCP, I don't know if I said that correctly, which he co-founded in 2012. And the center is a national team of artists who believe that with the right approach, the same tools and capacities that artists use to make art can be utilized to transform systems and improve the impacts of government and community-driven efforts and programs. Wonderful, and we'll drop a link in the chat to some of that work. So Michael, I'm gonna pass it to you to get us started.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks for inviting me and for allowing me to invite Ping and Alicia. Of course, it's so good to see you here, and thank you for your leadership at NET. Ping, I'm gonna say something for about a minute, and then we'll get going. We'll have a conversation. I've got some questions for you, but I figure, when Patricia reached out and said that we were able to think about mentors, artists who we admired, artists who influenced us, who we thought would make a good conversation partner for this series, I didn't have to think very long or hard. Ping is both a dear friend and a very important mentor in my life creatively and as an individual, figuring out how to be a theater practitioner and attempt to make meaningful contributions to the world. He is a model for, I think, many folks of how to walk in a unique and idiosyncratic and personal way, but always work collaboratively and make contributions to so many different places, both where he has resided and where he has not resided, which is certainly one of the things that we'll talk about. He has a tremendous body of work. I'm not going to spend really any time cataloging his projects or asking him to tell us his bio, because you can find it. It's online. There's interviews, there's videos, there's all the stuff. And I thought I would start by noting that Ping and I first met in 1998 when I took a workshop with him at the Co-Festival run by the tremendous Sabrina Hamilton up in Massachusetts. And at that time, Ping was pretty much the exact age that I am now. So I have the opportunity for the last—
Just don't say how old you were then.
I'm not getting into chronologies at all. I'm just noting that, that's a very long time. And in that time, I've gotten to co-create, co-direct, co-write 11 projects with you. You spoke at my wedding. We've been at many spaces together. And the thing that was coming to me as I prepared for today was when we first met in that summer, and then we ended up working soon after on a show that was first called American Gothic and then Truth and Beauty. We spent a lot of time together, and you started inviting me to have meals with you. I don't know if you remember, but when we were rehearsing in Blacksburg, Virginia, and had our first large period of time where we were together, you would invite me, sometimes me and Jeffrey, up for meals. You would cook. We're going to talk about food, but
Good.
We're going to talk about food. But I do want to say that when we first spent that time together, I was a bit overwhelmed and intimidated. You never made me feel that way, but it was my experience because of your illustrious body of work. And I was always trying to figure out what question should I ask you over food that would unlock some nugget of wisdom that would help me as I was at the time on my way to co-starting Sojourn Theatre. Like, what could you tell me about an organization? What could you tell me about your art? You don't even know this, but I would go and I would research your past projects. And at dinner, in between the appetizer and the main course you'd prepared, I would have memorized a question that I wanted to ask you about a project from 20 years ago, as if it was a casual thing that I just thought of in the moment. But I'd prepared, thinking that, then you would sort of reveal some bit of magic to me. You hated those questions. You responded to all those questions by just sort of laughing at me and saying, "Oh, my dear boy, we're just going to eat now. We're just going to hang out." And what I realized was that being in the rehearsal room with you, being in process with you, was actually the way to learn from you. You tell great stories and you've always been generous with sharing counsel, but really it's being in process with you that a lot of the learning has occurred for me. So as we spend time in the minutes that we have today, I thought instead of asking big questions about, your art and all the things, I actually have some kind of particular questions that I thought, since people watching this are coming through the network of ensemble theaters and are interested in collective creation and are interested in process, I thought maybe it would be nice to talk to you about some of the specific ways you work and not just these larger things. So I want to start by noting that when I watch you cook, I see you work with the same kind of intention and love and specificity that I see from you in the rehearsal room. So before I ask you about theater, I wonder if I could ask you about food. What does food mean to you? Why is it important to you? And how do you think about food in your life?
That's a great question. For those of you who don't know, my grandfather and my father and my uncles and my mother were all in the Chinese opera. They were, so I'm actually a third generation theater director. And I come from a culture of food. I'm Chinese. And like the French, you aren't Chinese if you don't like food. When my father came to America in the early 30s, China was going through civil war at the time, and the Japanese had already started to insinuate themselves into China. The future was challenging in China. I don't really know for a fact that that was the reason my father came to America. Part of it was he was on tour. He was on tour working in the diaspora where there were Chinese communities at the time. I mostly think of him in San Francisco, which is where my oldest sisters were born, that he was doing Chinese opera in San Francisco. But in the years before that, he was actually doing Chinese opera in Singapore and in Malaysia, as well as in mainland China. And my mother was performing in the 20s in Vietnam and in Cambodia. And when they came to America, they came in the 30s, as I said, but the height of the Chinese opera world in the diaspora in the United States was more in the teens and 20s. There were Chinese opera theaters in San Francisco that seated thousands of people. By the time they arrived, it was kind of on its last legs. Now, we must remember that this was a time when the Chinese were demonized by the immigration in the United States. They were not really allowed to stay in the United States largely. So they were there as traveling theater artists. And they had to leave eventually. They went to Canada, where my brother was born, and then they went to Toronto, where I was born. And by that time, their careers in the opera was diminishing more and more. And by the time they got to New York, I came to New York with them when I was 4 months old. I know this because on their immigration form, it said, my parents' visa said traveling theater troupe with a possible extension. And my form said under occupation, baby. So then we came to the United States, to New York, where they had some, shall we call them, refugee Chinese opera people already there that they knew, and they set up in New York. Now the thing is that I think and this is a long-winded way of saying that art and food are very connected. And my parents, when they got to New York, had to give up the opera eventually because they had 5 children to raise at that point, and aunt and 2 aunts to take care of in mainland China during the Second World War. His brother and his brood, and my father's first wife, who had 2 children that he continued to support. So there was no way that the Chinese opera was going to support all of this. So what did my father do? He opened a cafe, a dim sum cafe. And my father was a fabulous cook. And he only cooked for his family. He didn't cook for other people, just his family, once a week on his day off. So the connection between food and art to me are the same. There's no separation between those 2 things. And so I grew up, I feel like a lot of artists, a lot of dancers, they either go into therapy, especially dance people, go into therapy, which I think is very interesting, because in dance, you are very much giving of yourself, and there's a connection there also. So I see this as another connection, like food is for artists. I think many artists go into the food business as well. In the 70s, the Avant-Garde in New York opened a restaurant at that time, a derelict New York on the edge of bankruptcy, in an area that was not called Soho at the time when they started to pioneer Soho, but the avant-garde people started to move into that area because of the cheap rents in New York, and opened a restaurant called, I think it was called The Kitchen, I think.
Yes.
So again, there's that connection. That's a long-winded way of talking about food.
No, I appreciate it. It's wonderful for folks to hear a little bit of your story and your family and your origin. I'd like to sort of maybe use that to note that when I've been on projects with you, a very important thing to you has often been the meal that either you prepare or that is brought in for the cast, the crew. I have many really specific, wonderful memories of those meals. Sometimes they're on stage, sometimes they're at someone's apartment. So clearly, not just the making of food, but the action of sharing food is important to you. So I think you just had a thought. So before I ask my question, what would you like to add?
Well, I was going to say that food is community. There's the best way to break down social barriers and so on is food and drink. Certainly in China, drink first to loosen people's tongues. So that is also about community, I think. And that's been very important. And the theater is, as we all know, is a temporary family. It's always a temporary family, but it's very much a family. So it has in many ways, dynamics that are related to families as well.
So you are so wonderful about those meal experiences and what they mean. And you are also extremely skilled at creating a sense of community in a rehearsal space, in a process. And this is nowhere more evident than Undesirable Elements, which really in lesser hands could have a history of just a batch of disastrous attempts to bring strangers together, as opposed to what it has been, which is building family after family after family after family. So I'm curious, as you think about how food is a meaningful way to connect people, what have you learned or translated from the experience of sharing a meal into how you run a rehearsal room, separate from like the meal that you provide for folks? Once it's actually in rehearsal, how are you using that idea of connecting people in a way that food clearly does? How do you do that in a rehearsal room?
One thing I've thought about, I've had a company for 50 years now. It started out with just me, then some very kind people who helped me administrate voluntarily, and then little by little, as the company got on its feet, managing directors started coming in and so on. But I don't know where I was going with that. I'm lost.
Well,
the second.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. When you think about building community in a rehearsal process, you're so skilled at it. What are some things that you either do naturally or that you do purposefully?
Well, I think getting back to what I just was talking about, the reason I brought that up was that I never thought of, I still don't. I'm artistic director of Ping Chong Company for 50 years, but I'm not interested in being a leader. I'm interested in being part of a community. In my own company, I've never been a boss. And I think that's the reason why my managing director has been with me for over 30 years, because I don't behave like a boss. And
this is interesting though, because in a rehearsal room, of course, in the hierarchy of how theater is set up, you are the boss. So how are you not a boss and a boss? What does that mean to you?
It means that I let a lot of people, I give a lot of people license. Because even in rehearsals, as you know, like when we did Truth and Beauty, you guys came up with a lot of stuff. And then it was a synthesis between you and me and what we were doing together. It wasn't as if I was, and especially in the earlier years when the company was doing more devised work, we still do some, but it's not, later years, I started to write a lot of stuff myself as well. But for a good part of my career, it was all devised work. And if you came to a rehearsal, it looks like a kindergarten class where everybody's running around being crazy. And you go, where's the director? And so I'm not like, that's where I'm saying I'm not that much of a leader unless it comes down to the actual vision. That part of it, yes, I am very much a leader in that sense. But in terms of bureaucracies and running a company, I'm very much an artist in that sense, that I'm not interested in that aspect, which is selfish in a sense, but it's not really my forte any more than passing in mathematics during junior high school was. I'm just no good at math. So I know what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. And, but there's no question that Michael's right, that I'm very clear about artistic choices. But at the same time, one of my longest company members, when I had a company, said, Ping knows what he doesn't want more than he knows what he wants. And that's probably true, you know, and because I'm also open to whoever's in the room creating. And I really, like with my designers, with my actors, I don't like a passive actor. I like a performer who brings something to the table, because everyone's going to bring something to the table that I didn't think of. And that's potentially something that can be very creative and useful. So yes, I'm a leader. No, I'm not. I don't know what to say.
It's interesting the way you say that. You sparked a memory for me that I haven't thought of for a while, which is, I think in 1999, I was assisting you in Chicago on an Undesirable Elements. And there was a moment
what a nightmare that one was.
Well, but the show was beautiful. The process.
The show was beautiful. The process was a nightmare.
And that might explain actually the moment I'm about to describe. There was a moment when you were struggling a little bit with something, and different people were giving you different feedback, and you were getting a little frustrated. And there was an intern in the room who'd brought in like a snack or something, I think for you. And you turned to all these people who were trying to get your attention, and you turned to them and you said, well, you've been in here a few minutes. Were you watching? And this intern was like, yeah. And you said, what do you think? Like you asked the intern. Well, all these people were trying to get your attention. And it was a very meaningful moment for me in terms of understanding the power of, as Liz Lerman would say, working horizontally and not just vertically. And it taught me to remember that anybody who comes near the room is fair game for a useful conversation.
We live in a world that's so compartmentalized. You know, you go to your doctor and he sends you to a specialist. Nobody has a holistic view of things. And my instinct is to be more holistic in the way the company operates, in the managerial end, in the way that we work in a rehearsal space. And anyone is potentially capable. An outside eye, I always say, is incredibly valuable. You know, someone who's actually not involved can be very valuable. And I remember when we were doing one of my giant puppet shows, adult puppet shows, at the Seattle Rep. My office manager was there because she's Japanese, and the puppeteers, the puppet designer was Japanese, so she was very useful to helping with the translation and so on. And we were way behind schedule, and I said, go help with the puppets. So in my company, I always go, nobody has to be pigeonholed into one spot if they think they can contribute in ways greater than their job description. That kind of bureaucracy of everything has to be this is something I balk against. Yeah.
So I want to use that. I really appreciate that you just framed it that way. And by the way, he's talking about the tremendous Sachiko Willis,
yes,
amazing human being and artist.
Yes.
But you just talked about this sort of not getting people stuck in one box. So I'd like to jump to a different track for a moment. And because I have the advantage of a couple decades of conversation with you, I know that I think of you as an original downtown artist, always progressive in ways even beyond many others in your field were and are, influencing many artists who've come after you, but also are now functioning in a moment where progressive sort of means different things than it did 50 years ago, 40 years ago. And I know you've expressed to me like this interesting kind of trying to figure out, are people boxing people in ways that perhaps are not as useful as you would like? and you perceive that sometimes as limiting. And I'm wondering, this is perhaps too large a question and I can get more specific, but I just wonder what you have seen change from when you began to make work to this moment in terms of what it means to be radical, what it means to be progressive as an artist in the world now versus what it meant then.
Well, I think that I think artists react to the times they live in. We know if you look at the news today, in Burma, they're persecuting poets and artists, you know, and this is true in other places too, which is to say that we have much more value than most people give us credit for, because why would you bother trying to kill us all if we didn't have some meaning? And I think that what artists do is that they reflect the times. They are a conscience to the times. They are trying to be, I think, I'm just talking about this in the large sense, trying to be a conscience, as I said, but to be also reflect. When I say reflecting the times, it's like, right now in the world we live in, we know that there are very large social issues that are important for artists to respond to. And that's, if there's change, that has been a big part of it, is the social justice aspect of it. I mean, I was moving that way all along, but first it was a personal, it was more personal, and then it became more universal, the question of social justice, the question of marginalization, the question of being voiceless. And as time went on, and as the political situation changed, I grew more and more convinced that I had to change to respond to a world that's growing increasingly unjust.
How did you change?
Well, for the first 2 decades of my work, from 1970 through into the earlier mid 80s, the work was more allegorical, more less specific to the real world. But by the mid 80s, I was already beginning to address issues that I saw happening in our society, like, really, you know, by mid 80, when I did my my version of Nosferatu, which was I would say the first, you could almost, not really the first, but most explicit, the first more explicit work on gentrification, for example, because the 80s was when gentrification was hitting New York big time, and what we think of as the whole Wall Street, you know, let's push them into the river if they can't afford to live there, started then in the 80s. It was also the time of the AIDS epidemic as well. And Nosferatu addresses that, but also addresses the whole ecological disaster aspect of what was happening to our society. Rachel Carson, with whom I read way back in the beginning when Silent Spring came out, was, you know, she was the great, you know, canary in the coal mine back then, and that was very present in Nosferatu. So there are multiple layers of things that I felt were important to address. And when Reagan came into the office, I had to respond to what that meant, because I knew that was major. And we know it because this is what we're dealing with because of Reagan, who came in, you know. And so that's when, and personally, I had, as a young artist without any guidance, so to speak, and as a young immigrant artist who was marginalized at the beginning, going to school as an art student, everything, my culture did not count for shit in the world I was in, you know, even in the avant-garde world, really, you know. But at the same time, I didn't have any guidance. So I was looking to Europe as as a place of excellence, and that's where I was looking towards. But in the late 80s, I was invited to Japan to do a show at the Toga Festival. And that's Suzuki. I think his last name is, I think his first name
Tadashi
is,
Suzuki.
Yeah, Suzuki
Yeah.
gave. And that was the first time I was in Asia since I was 17, which was a real reawakening of my own roots, because even though I'm not Japanese, being in Japan, I didn't stand out. I was not an other in the way I had been most of my life. And that was a reawakening. And then 2 years later, I was in Hong Kong, which is my culture in every sense. As I said recently, I think of myself as more Cantonese than Chinese, because I'm Cantonese. And what's happening in Hong Kong today is the end of my culture, the beginning of the end of my culture. And why I related to Hong Kong was because it was both Western and Eastern, which is what I am. I'm a product of both worlds. So those are, and because of the personal reawakening of my roots, and I stopped looking towards Europe, and I started to think about my roots in Asia. But I also started to think, well, what is American theater? Is American theater's roots European, or is it anything? And that's when I started to go, what is American theater, and what is being an American? Who is an American? Who decides who is an American? And what is American art? And that's when I went, fuck you. American art is what all the influences this country is. Black, white, Pakistani, anything. That is our manure. That is what we draw from.
Our compost.
Our compost, right? And so let's redefine what American art is. And I think we're still in the midst of that now.
Well, let me ask you. That was thank you for that. Let me ask you like a sideways question then, because as you start to talk about your influences and your journey, I know that you are also a student of film and a lover of film, and really a very early originator, adopter of bringing media into live performance. And you have watched film, cinema, as well as film technologies change so much in the 50 years of your company's life. You still use film, you still use media. How do you think about the relationship between film/media and live performance today? Like, how are you thinking about it now when you think about your work?
Film is my great love.
Yeah.
And my theater has been largely informed by film. As I tell many students today when I'm teaching classes, I said, when I started making theater or performance in the 70s, people were mostly not using sound at all. If they use sound at all, it's the gunshot, bang. That was the only sound in the whole play. Or, I think it's gonna rain, thunderclap. That's how crude it was in terms of using sound. I would say that generally in the United States, no one knew shit about sound. However, oddly enough, Oregon Shakespeare had a sound designer on their staff way early, which was fascinating. When I finally went there to work, I found out that they were on top of the sound thing. But I would say nationally, people did not have a clue about using sound. Media also, because I understood coming from film, the power of sound, it was a natural, it wasn't even, I didn't have to think about it. It was like, of course you use sound. Why wouldn't you use sound, And in terms of media, it has to come from both my visual arts roots, because I actually studied visual arts before I studied film. That also informs the way I think about the different elements of what's on stage. I don't think, like the West is completely bias towards literary theater. And I think in a more interdisciplinary way about all the different elements that can be equally important in a production. So, and because I come from film, my view of what you can do with stage pictures, what you can do with space comes from the sound, comes from the visual arts and dance world, actually, because the dance world treats space differently than theater artists, who often treat space rather flat, in a rather flat way. Whereas dance people know that space, a stage is a three-dimensional space and should be activated. So that's also an important, it's not media, but it's also a very important part of my influence, because I started out as a dancer with Meredith Monk. Yeah.
You taught me that that dynamic theater is not just bringing a text to life, but that it's layers of score, an architectural score, an image score, sound score, a text score, a body score. And that was hugely informative on my own practice and Sojourn. Can I ask, before we open it up, can I ask one more question, Patricia? Is that okay?
Yeah, totally. That's totally fine. So folks, just get your questions ready and then Michael, go ahead.
Okay. I want to make sure, Ping, that we have a moment to sort of note your very current work. I'm thinking about the kaleidoscope work with the great Talvin Wilkes. I'm thinking about the work you did over the pandemic, which included short films, which I got to participate in one of those and enjoy the others. I'm wondering, as we come out of pandemic, and as you are at a point where you are sort of figuring out your relationship to your own company and to your practice, I know, because you have told me, you're not done making. Making is still in the cards for you. You're not done making. But like what kind of impulses do you have towards making these days, both in terms of form and content? What is interesting you?
Well, I'm an artist. That means that it may not be theater anymore. It may be something else. Because I am coming close to the end of my theater practice. So, and I don't know what the future is after that. And I welcome the not knowing, because we don't ever know from day to day, from moment to moment, what will happen next anyway. People said, what are you going to do if you stop making theater? I said, I don't know. And I want to be open to that. And it's not scary. It is scary. But I feel that I have to trust my instincts that it's an important moment for me, because nobody lives forever. And I'm 75. And and I don't want to be trying to create work when my energies are not up to it. So I'd rather gracefully bow out when the time comes than to just keep on doing it for the narcissistic aspect of making art. I don't want to be one of those people where the hook has to come out to get me off. So I'm finishing up right now. I just finished writing a small book-length essay called "The Ones Who Got Away," which is about all the pieces that I wanted to do that didn't get done for one reason or another. And when I started it, I said, well, there's about 10 pieces that I can think of. And as I wrote it, it kept growing and growing and growing. And I went, oh my God, I've got to stop. And now it's finished. The essay's finished, but there actually were more pieces after as well. And I said, that's it. I'm not going to go back and add those other pieces, because this is largely most of the works I didn't do that I wanted to do. Yeah.
What a beautiful and honest answer. Will you please send me a draft of that essay, by the way?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Can't wait to read that. Patricia,
Yes.
I'm going to turn to you and see if we have questions, and then I'll come back with a last question at the end, if that's okay.
Yes, I mean, I think everybody wants to read that essay, so let us know when it's available and we could share it out. So anybody that wants to speak a question into the space, you can just go ahead and, unsilence yourself and ask either Michael or Ping a question. I have a question if nobody jumps in, but I just want to leave some air.
Yeah, it's nice. I have 25 more, but that's nice to leave the room space. Yeah. This is fun, Ping. It's nice to have an excuse.
I know. Well, we did have a question in the chat that I want to honor, that Joan was just so curious about what the situation was that you were describing a nightmare process.
Chicago.
Well, just what creates, sorry. Hi, everyone.
Oh, there you go, Joan.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Ping. Hi, Michael, everybody. It's not that I'm interested in gossip. It's not that. It's what I want to know, although I am interested in gossip, but that's not what I'm asking right now. What I'm wanting to know, Ping and Michael, is, what is the situation what created a situation that was so problematic for the spirit of the group, for the work that you were trying to do? Because I think a lot of us have been in these situations, and I just am interested to know, what are those things? And then how do you come through it? So that was in that spirit I asked.
Beautiful.
Okay, I'm not going to name names.
Don't name names. No,
I'm
no.
not going to name names.
No.
The problem was not that the leadership was callous or mean or ill-meaning. It was just that the leadership person was an artist and not an administrator. And but she had to survive, so there she was. And she was not on top of presenting a work. So for example, the announcement cards practically didn't go out until 2 days before the show went up. Stuff like that, or that there wasn't a sound person to run the sound until like the week of tech, things like that, and so consequently there was no audience to this thing. There was very few people, but even so, there was an important audience member who did come, who brought another version of that show to the Spoleto Festival in Charleston. So one person can make such a big difference, right? But the thing about that production that still moves me is that show was documentary work with 5 or 6 people from 5 or 6 different cultures talking about their experience of being other in America, of marginality, of the struggles of being whatever, an immigrant or a Black person or whatever, in the show. But there was one person in that show who asked the audience during the show, is anybody here from Tajikistan?
Wow.
Because he was so alone.
Yeah.
And that was so moving, because he was alone. And his story was harrowing of his experience in Tajikistan, So anyway, that's what that was. So the thing is, anybody who's been in theater has the challenge of working with producers who are not up to the task for whatever reason. Whether in this case, it was not out of malice. This person was a good person, was a good artist, and needed to survive, but was in the wrong job.
It's interesting, Ping. It reminds me of something I've noticed about you. Tell me if this feels fair. You are obviously super generous and easygoing and fun in process, but you expect competence and effort from everyone you work with. And when I've seen you over the years frustrated, it is not because someone made a mistake, not because someone was late because they had something going on. It's when you feel people in the space or in the project are not demonstrating effort or competence. That is when I have seen it hurt you.
I think that we can all relate to that. Yeah.
I would like to ask Michael a question, actually, based on this beautiful conversation. And I know you mentioned this idea of layered score, but maybe just even expanding on, I know you've had a lot of time with Ping, and what would you say is a lesson that really to your core you have received as a gift from working with Ping, and that you've really incorporated into your own practice?
Well, there are a bunch. I mean, there are gifts that are in the realm of my own like aesthetic. There are gifts in terms of learning how he co-created and led a company for a long time, and how that would help me think about leading a company, and his very direct advice, particularly in the early years, but across that experience. But if I had to sum up something more like just human, Ping, I have learned from Ping that treating folks with love and generosity and curiosity is the best way to sort of be the person you want to be in the space, and also the best way to make good art. And so that's something I learned from, I mean, I was a young artist. I mean, I wasn't that young, but I was a young artist when we started working together. And the fact that like, I couldn't understand it when he said to me the first time we met at a workshop, and he said, "This is interesting what you're working on. I'm going to have my manager call you and maybe we'll talk about like exploring this idea together." And I just assumed I would never hear from his fancy manager. But I did hear from him, and Ping actually wanted to be in conversation. And that stunned me, and that he meant it, and that the conversation continued. And that has helped me see how important it is to continue to be generous and hospitable with other artists who may be at different places or younger places in their bodies of work, not just for them, but because of how much I can learn from them and grow with them. So that's a big one.
That's so beautiful. Love that. Wow, you all, we are at time for Michael's final question, unless anybody has a burning, I'm just looking real quick. Anybody
Hello?
have a burning last question? Yes, Abner?
Hi. Yeah, it's Abner. Hello, it's an honor to to take this question, but I've been following. So I'm an Asian Cultural Council alumni, actually. So I think that I have been following, in fact, your conversations for the whole last year while I was in the US in a very unique time during my grant. But unfortunately, there was very little chance of really participating in Ping Chong and Company. I've learned about you through Jessica Prudencio, who really recommended.
Oh,
Yeah. So anyway, I'm calling in from the Philippines right now. It's 2 o'clock, almost 2 o'clock.
wow.
So yeah. So my question is, I like this acknowledgement and wonderful conversation, by the way, Michael and Ping. My question is, I really I appreciate how you acknowledge this phase in your life as an artist, as to where your energy is and how does it fit in. But with everything that happened for the last year, where all these intersections of issues on racial justice and social justice and climate justice, that also springs from a lot of intergenerational and intercultural gaps. If you are to speak to a younger generation, obviously of artists specific to theater, or those who are doing interdisciplinary practice in this time of technology and ecology push and pull, what is it that should be remembered?
I think the most important thing right now in the world we live in is to remember your humanity. Forget the technology. Remember your humanity, because that's being assaulted by our world. We must remember that the human connection is the most important thing. However you figure that out, whether it's over. I mean, when Michael and I worked on that Chicago project, that one, I don't know if we actually had a food gathering.
We did.
Or not. We did, yeah.
Yeah, we did.
So the food gathering is a very important thing. Always. It is connection, it is family, it is bonding, it is making, I mean, Bread and Puppet does it, Bread and Puppet Theater, for example, they were early practitioners of that, and also that technology isn't everything. One, and two is the bureaucratization of our society is deadening. So We need, and I think the other thing that's important is to try to stay connected to your inner life, because that is the real you. And if you're not connected to that inner life, you're not you. And in this society, the elevators always have music, the restaurants have always noise or music. You're never allowed to hear your true self. And we need, if we're not going to be enslaved psychologically by this world, we need to figure out how to make that a discipline and a reality. Is to be truly human, you have to be able to hear your insides, because that's the real you.
That's some deep shit, my friend. That was beautiful. Abner, I'm so grateful that you asked that question. It really, I'm just going to pretend that that's the question I was going to ask at the end.
Perfect.
Back on your brilliance there. But I will ask you, Ping, one other thing as we close up, and it's a very short one and not quite as powerful as Abner's beautiful question. But Ping, what are you doing for dinner tonight?
Well, I have no idea. I'm actually going to see some kind of public performance. I don't even know what it is exactly, because it's a friend's birthday, and I don't know whether there's any plans for anything after that, but it's a performance revolving around Toulouse-Lautrec. That's all I know. Okay. But aside from that question, I want to say, Michael, I really appreciate the mastery of your interviewing process today. Total mastery. First of all, love you to death.
Love you, my friend.
And thank you for asking insightful and really, really terrific questions. Thank you. And thank you, Patricia. And where is
Alicia?
Alicia, thank you for having me today. I really thank you. And,
wow.
And I want to wish everyone a blessed year.
Thank you, Ping. Sending you love too, and so grateful to get this time with you. Thank you.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Wow, this was so wonderful. And just thank you all for being here.